This is the TechCurrents Podcast, real talk about technology and stories from working in the tech world. All opinions expressed on this show are solely those of the host and guests. And now, here is your host, Sam Cavaliere.
And thank you again for joining us at the TechCurrents Podcast. I am your host, Sam Cavaliere, and joining me once again is my very good friend, partner, and co-host, Ron Melanson. Ron, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Sam, super excited to be here tonight. And I greatly appreciate the opportunity to introduce our next guest on the podcast. So today's guest is actually someone I've had the opportunity and good fortune to work with. I learned from him, laughed with him way back when Sam, he and I all roamed the hallways of Microsoft in New York in the late 90s. That was like, for those of you who are new, that's when the internet was just kind of becoming a thing. Harry Patz, he's a force in technology and leadership. He's helped drive billion-dollar growth at giants like Microsoft, Samsung, and Syniverse. And it's interesting, Harry has that rare mix of business smarts and human insight. He's going to talk about how building his high-performance teams, taking on big challenges. And one thing I really appreciate about Harry is he always still makes time to think a few steps ahead of everybody else. Beyond the boardroom, Harry's a voracious reader, an industry speaker, and someone who leads with both his head and his heart. But more than anything, truth be told, Harry's a friend, he's a mentor, and he's a guy who's actually talked me off a few ledges, brought his wisdom, his honesty, and just the right amount of sarcasm to make things work for me. Harry, I greatly appreciate you joining us. I'm thrilled you're here. Welcome to the show.
Ron, so great to see you. And of course, I will always call you Ronnie, which no one ever calls you, but I
You
call
and my mom. Yeah.
for the reason that it's an inside joke. And of course, so good to see you. So good to see Sam, bringing back a lot of memories when we called on the then Big Six accounting companies, now the Big Four. My daughter's a junior in high school, is thinking of going into accounting. It's just weird how your life kind of comes full circle, but really so happy to see both of you doing so well, following your careers and your friendship. I really don't resemble that excellent intro you gave me, Ron, but I'm incredibly humbled and thankful, and honestly just happy to be there, just talking with two people who are just great guys and great professionals.
Oh, awesome, Harry. Thanks, man. And by the way, since your daughter is in high school, you should really drive her and support her to be an accountant, because that won't happen. If you if you pour gas on the fire there, dude, she's gonna be like, nope, I'm out. I'm gonna do
Debits,
something
credits. My other daughter is a freshman in college, had her accounting final today, 3 hours. So it's supposed to end at 7 o'clock. We'll see how she did, but she's a good student. I still remember some of that stuff. Not my cup of tea. Great respect for accountants.
Yep.
I just remember my accounting professor always said accounting is not bookkeeping. I never thought it was, but in any event.
Hey, man, I want to be respectful of your time, and I greatly appreciate you carving out some time to talk to us. And, I really appreciate your journey, and I really appreciate your worldview and things that you've experienced. One of the things I'm really interested in, and this comes up a lot on LinkedIn, is leading versus managing. I would argue they're wildly different, because I see managers that list themselves as leaders or aspiring leaders. I very rarely see leaders aspiring to be managers. So, titles don't mean a heck of a lot, and especially in the world of LinkedIn. So, talk to us a little bit about your view of, what does a leader do and what separates leaders from managers in the real world?
Great question. Profound one. If you're on LinkedIn a lot, like the three of us and many other people are, you see those same tired graphics and kind of debates about it. But me, I'm a big guy who watches a lot, used to watch a lot of movies. I don't watch a lot of current movies, but I've seen a lot of old movies. One of my favorites is Full Metal Jacket. And there's a point in there where the soldier, Private Joker, played by Matthew Modine, is talking about Carl Jung, and he's saying it's the young thing, the duality of man, because the general says to him, "Why do you have a helmet that says born to kill, but a peace symbol on your lapel?" He talks about Jung. And I think the best leaders are both leaders and managers. I don't think you can have absolutes. When I think of leaders, it is not exclusive to people who manage people, but it can be, and increasingly is. Leaders inspire and I think facilitate outcomes through others. That doesn't mean they manipulate them, although I've seen plenty of leaders do that, but they can sort of help set a vision, understand where we've been going. And I think the leadership part of it also acts with empathy. They bring people along, motivate, decide on the talent, and help facilitate those outcomes. But there's also a fair amount of good old managerial excellence. One of the things I learned, I don't know if it's Microsoft or some other place, is metrics drive behavior. So what are you really trying to accomplish? If you're in the sales org, like I sort of grew up in that world, you've got your top line goals, you might have cost targets, but you also might have leading indicators. How many new wins of product X, or what is your renewal rate, or things like that. The leader, while inspiring and motivating others, also has to manage and hold people accountable to that outcomes. If you've got extremes of both, where you've got this incredibly visionary, motivating individual, but then you look around, you're not hitting targets, you're not hitting goals, people aren't getting paid, you're kind of like, so Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? On the flip side, and we experienced this a little bit at Microsoft, you have the internally focused guy or gal who's locked up in their office, never talks to customers. They're just checking every metric on every sheet, but that's all that they do. They're not leading, inspiring, supporting, and coaching their team. So I think the best leaders have a strong mix of the motivation, support, the talent management, the vision of where we're going, what are the growth possibilities, how can we better support our customers, and obviously if there's finance or other things, you can find specifics of that. But I also think the leader also has to manage, not micromanage, but ensure the details, the trains are getting run on time, and you're driving the goals. I'm a big Churchill guy. I've read a couple of books. I love Andrew Roberts' biography of Churchill. It's bigger than a couple of bricks. But, there's a mythical Churchill quote of his many great ones that says, no matter how grand the strategy, you have to occasionally look at the results. He actually didn't say it, but it's apocryphal. It is true in that you've got to look at the results. You can't have just the foo-foo vision, great stuff. You can't have the micromanager. Being a New Yorker, I talk a lot, so I'll pause there, if that makes sense.
Oh, that was great, and I greatly appreciate that. And
Yeah,
really,
absolutely. I think it's a great description and a great way to articulate. And I think uh, there are a lot of people, including myself, who can take a lot from just that explanation and take a minute to kind of reflect on that to understand where we have room to grow in certain areas. Because I know I've never been accused of not being the visionary. But I have been asked on occasion, hey, so how did that all turn out?
But I
And
think it's a great point though too, just in general for careers and leadership. We've all got blind spots. And I love what you said about learning because my advanced age, all of us have to keep learning every day. I'm a big Charlton Heston fan. I watch the Ten Commandments before Easter. I love, El Cid, Planet of the Apes, whatever. But one of his quotes later in life, he was on one of those like nighttime soap operas called The Colbys. It's like Dynasty. This is like Charlton Heston, Academy Award winner, Hollywood hero, and he was past his prime in career. And I can't find the quote on the internet, but I remember reading it. People asked, "Why are you on the Colbys?" He said, "It gives me a chance to practice my craft." And we all, as leaders and managers, have to keep practicing our craft until the end.
yeah,
yeah, spot on. Greatly appreciate that. That was great. How many times am I going to hear about Charlton Heston and Winston Churchill all in one answer? So, it's
we're only a few minutes into it. We got time.
I'm telling you,
I got more. I got more in the bag of tricks.
take
All
your
right.
hands off of me, you dirty ape.
You damn dirty ape.
Damn dirty ape.
True story. I have to give you my favorite line in Planet of the Apes from Charlton Heston. It's not that, and it comes back to leadership. Sometimes you can just overestimate a situation. Like, look, you guys are both incredibly accomplished professionals, not just one-trick ponies at Microsoft. You were great there. Sam, I know you were at VMware a long time. Ron, killing it at Amazon and other places. But there's a scene in Planet of the Apes where the astronauts crash. And they're watching the native humans walk through the jungle. And one of the guys, Landon, says to Charlton Heston, who's Taylor, we got off at the wrong stop. And Charlton Heston is like, you're supposed to be the optimist, Landon. If this is the best they've got in 6 months, we'll be running this planet. Reality is, didn't work out so well for Landon. And you know what happened to Taylor. So you can think as a leader, you got this. You might not.
True. That's definitely truer words have never been spoken. That is true. And that you know what, that goes for leaders, but it goes for ICs as well, especially in today's market. That, yeah, you might think you got this, and then The universe might have other plans.
The universe always has other plans.
Hey. All right, so let's keep this ball rolling, man. So this actually somebody recently posted this. I think it was late last week, on LinkedIn around the term servant leader.
Okay.
And I know a lot of people talk about it like, oh, servant leadership and servant leader. They put it in their tagline inside their LinkedIn. But you, from everything I've ever seen, no, I get it. But you do truly embody it. So like, what does it look like on a really tough day when those targets are missed and egos flare and fingers are pointing at each other, or kind of take me through that a little bit about that whole servant leadership piece and how you really bring these teams together to focus on one goal, one team, one goal.
Sure. I'll maybe answer sort of it in two ways, being a good sales guy. I'll sort of start with what I think servant leadership and how it actually will get to your sort of tough day point. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to sympathy versus empathy. I think anybody can be sympathetic. Oh, you're sick, or you're feeling well. I'm sorry for you. Empathy literally means trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes or circumstances. Not necessarily in their shoes, but literally in their circumstances. So, it's like if you remember years ago, Hilton or one of the hotel chains had their executives go clean rooms for a day, just to know what the housekeepers felt like. I think it's the same thing. Other companies should have their executives go put in opportunities in Salesforce or whatever CRM they use, because they can understand how painful it is. So empathy is a lot of understanding the circumstances. And I think as a servant leader, you're trying to be empathetic. The two or three questions I always think that are part of this are, one is, how can I help you? And I think whether you're managing the team or not, you're running to someone in the office, whatever, you're trying to understand, give before you get. How can I help you? It might be someone who's on the sales engineering team and you're running sales. I'm making this up. And you try and help them any way they can, not looking for anything from you. It may be that you cannot help them, but at least you're trying. Sometimes, a lot of times, people will, as a leader, come to me with a problem, and my team or direct reports. And I always say to them, what do you want to do? And that's sort of like, what have you thought is the solution? How do you want to approach it? Sometimes they may just want validation from me, which I can give or I cannot give. But it's really trying to help them solve their problem. The other question, I think, which you might think is part of it or not, it's like, what problem are we trying to solve? A lot of times we've all been in that meeting where it gets heated, you start arguing about whatever. And I took Latin in high school, and I remember always hearing about how when the Romans were arguing, and the Romans said it, somebody would scream, Carthago dolenda est, Carthage, Rome's enemy, must be destroyed. And they forgot what they were arguing about. Unless you think I'm on a tangent, it's more about just trying to understand what the problem is. But at the end of the day, there's certain questions as a servant leader. It's about supporting your team, facilitating them to get outcomes. Does it mean your team is always right? No. But it means you serve them. You have a duty of care. They are your charges. And sometimes it might be, hey, you're messing up. We should do this better, or here's the feedback. So it really is about the number one thing I would say, Ron and Sam, servant leadership, it's not about you. It's about how you support your team. But again, not in a Santa Claus babysitter way. You look at it almost from an inverted org chart. I have a responsibility to make this team successful. And if I make them successful, I'm probably going to be successful too.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. And one of the things he says a lot is, you're not in charge of people. You are in the charge of those people. That. And he really kind of drills into that. And the other interesting piece that you just mentioned, and a lot of times I'll challenge my team with and I picked it up online, is a 1-3-1, right? We have one problem. I need you to think of 3 solutions. Pick what you think is the best of those 3, and then let's talk about it and make it happen, right? I don't want to solve your problems. I want to help you solve your problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's the teach a person to fish kind of mentality, but it's also the sounding board. And I don't know if this is part of servant leadership or not, but I'm also a believer in treating everybody fairly, but not necessarily equally. What does that mean? It might be some people really want to run every idea by you and get your feedback, and others people are sort of more autonomous. So I think as a leader, part of that being that servant leader is you've got to flex your leadership style and meet them where they're at. It can't just be, I only work one way. And I'm a frustrated sports guy. I never was a great athlete, though I was a swimmer. You sort of have like certain coaches, they have their system. The players have to fit their system. There's other coaches that say, this is the talent I got. how do I maximize the talent I have from these people? Maybe bring another talent versus forcing, the run and shoot or whatever system.
Mhm.
I think as leaders evolve in 2025, and I'm guessing we'll talk about AI later, you got to be a little bit more flexible. It's not the command and control. This is the way. You've got to realize, especially when you're managing globally, cross cultures, whatever, there's different hot buttons, different motivating factors. Your team will need different things. Different team members will need different things from you. And you've got to strive to meet that.
Dude, I can't believe we're 5 minutes in, 7 minutes in, and already now we've got a Mandalorian reference. I really
And
appreciate that. Thank
actually, I've never even seen The Mandalorian, so this is
Oh.
a tacit. I gave you a reference without even seeing it.
There it is. Well, congratulations.
I know May
Yeah,
the 4th was a few days ago.
Disney would be proud, so thank you.
Okay. My
So
wife's
you
a Disney
you
fan.
mentioned sports. I know you're a big Mets fan, right?
Huge.
And as I am married to a Mets fan, ergo I am also a Mets fan.
I'm
So
happy.
what things? I know that you were really involved in the New York Mets stadium deal and launching some new business models. You've done some really cool and bold things. And going back to your servant leadership piece, I mean, how do you create a culture for folks to? And actually, if you want to read people in on what your the New York Stadium
Yeah,
deal
I
was,
will.
that'd be cool. But I mean, I'm interested in how you create a culture of smart risk taking, but foster a culture of learning versus penalizing. Because a lot of folks, and I think you and Sam and I, we lived through some days at Microsoft where mistakes were buried and hidden because you didn't ever want to admit that you had made a mistake because again going back to one of our earlier podcasts, you would be smitten. Right,
Yes,
Sam?
that's right.
So yes, lightning would strike you and you'd be smitten. And one of the things when I moved over to Amazon, one of the best things that I had seen was we learn much more from a failure than a success. Right? We embrace failure. We want to learn from it and try not to do it again. Right? We had a bunch of moonshots. We tried different things all the time, and some things work out, some things don't. But the beauty of it is we're trying it and we're not penalizing people. So what are you doing to cultivate that culture of, we'll call it smart risk taking?
So, great set of questions. Let me talk a little bit about the Mets, and then I'll sort of lead into that smart risk
You've
taking.
got to talk about the Mets, please.
So I was Samsung for about 4 years as the senior vice president and general manager of our display division. When they first called me about the job, I thought they meant advertising. It's not what they meant. Displays are sort of all the screens you see in a store, digital signage, monitors on your desk. They make a dedicated hotel TV business, etc. And they also had a wholly owned company that wasn't yet fully integrated called Prism View, which did LED spectaculars. So they were in the process as I joined, and this wholly owned subsidiary had won a few football stadiums. I don't know if you guys on the West Coast or Sam, you've been up in LA, but the Rams Stadium,
Okay.
SoFi Stadium, as well as the Las Vegas Raiders, were football stadiums that this company Prism View, but now owned by Samsung, and I had responsibility for, were there. So, and those are beautiful stadiums. If you see them on TV, if you ever go in person, I mean, there's
Sure.
the Halo Oculus or whatever you call it at
Sure.
the Ram Stadium. That's just in Charger Stadium is just absolutely beautiful. But Samsung had never won a baseball stadium. And my team had gotten the Mets interested in 2021 or so. And what was interesting was, of course, this was during the pandemic. And so, we're all working at home, or many of us were, and we're starting to have these discussions with the Mets and their then chief technical officer. And by the way, the Mets had recently been purchased by hedge fund titan Steve Cohen, so the, shall we say, expenditures under the prior regime, the Wilpons, Cohen was approaching it differently, but still a tough negotiator. So again, keep in mind it's Samsung, and it's such a phenomenal company. It's a top 5 brand. The engineering is wonderful, but it is mostly a consumer company. Phones, TVs, monitors, and their manufacturing engineering prowess is excellent. But we were selling enterprise, B2B, and we were also selling a big project. Like, these customers want to know, hey, would Samsung stand behind? Could they do what we needed? And so a lot of the discussion was showing them the technology, but it also was the bigger story. And the stakes were high because we had never won a baseball stadium. And so, I'm dealing with the CTO and, several other people, and, can we support it? And what can we do? And at the end of the day, they wanted a new center field scoreboard, which isn't installed now. They wanted LED around the stadium. They wanted some signage outside, even things like we call the dugout lips. If you watch the game where you go, there's like a little, I don't know, maybe a foot lip on the top of the dugout that has LED. And, they wanted to make this a showcase, but there was the product. There was also our content management software, and there was also the human capital services. And we had to put this all together. And, I obviously can't tell you the exact cost of it, but tens of millions of dollars here. It's a big 3-year project. And there's also a sponsorship component and so forth. And so, we're bidding, and, when you're in these like high stakes, big multi-year negotiations, can you do it? What is it going to cost? Can you do it profitably? All those kind of things. And, Samsung, again, sells tons of excellent consumer products en masse. Culturally, doing a big project like this is a little different and requires a lot of approval and support. But, we were able to do this. The Mets, to their credit, drove a hard bargain. And there's stuff to think about, like, okay, can a Conad substation handle the power of all this all these like weird stuff. But you know what? I remember we basically got the deal done by Thanksgiving of 2021 in time for the 22 season. So everything but the big scoreboard was done in 22. And then the scoreboard was installed in early 23. And by that point, I was departing. But, Mark Brubaker, who was the then CTO, was just a great partner. Our legal worked well together. Here's a weird dynamic that I'll just pause on the Mets. I think this went better in a weird way because we could do weekly video calls. Because again, it was still during the pandemic. It almost moved faster, maybe because we did video calls, than if we had to keep meeting sort of in person. And we did meet in person a lot, but a lot of it was also video. So great accomplishment. Whenever I go to JFK or LGA, I'm like, my team did this. It's a sense of immense pride, like one of my biggest career accomplishments. It's not mine. It's the whole team and the Samsung brand and everything. But it's one of those lasting things, like some of the other deals maybe we'll talk about. So anyway, that's that.
All right. Well, thanks for reading everybody in on the Mets thing. I knew some of it, but I didn't know to that level of detail. So greatly appreciate it.
That's awesome.
But so to your point, though, how do you take the bold risk taking, right? So keep in mind, in the mindset for most of the culture at Samsung at the time, it was consumer products. How many TVs can we sell at Best Buy? How many whatever? And they do it great. Different kind of business problem, right? So I had to sort of get the team to believe that, hey, we can win our first baseball. We can do it competitively. We can put all these services together from Prism View. We can stretch our content and whatever. So, part of it's also getting your team to believe that you can do this.
Because it's more than Black Friday specials.
Exactly. By the way, that's incredibly important. It's great.
It is.
It's a different kind of muscle.
Right.
And so getting the team, getting the headquarters folks to believe it, and I'm kind of out there with the customer, and you're sort of managing all the requirements, and it's like, okay, we can do this, but we can't do this. And you get into all those sort of negotiations. But I do think as a leader, you've got to set, here's the goal, here's the North Star, here's where we're going, here's what we can accomplish. Sometimes you can't maybe get to that North Star, but you've got to set the vision. If I don't believe, why should the team believe? And I remember reading one somewhere about, not many people use aspirin right now, but like when Bayer and Anacin or whatever were competing in the 70s, even though it was the same freaking chemical compound, the advertising team for Bayer had to believe they were better than Anacin. So you have to believe, if I believe, the team believes, and the customer also wants to see that you're confident, that you can do it and you can prove them, and you test things and so forth. So it is selling the confidence from leader, not irrational confidence, but confidence nonetheless, and then sort of making that comments and realizing, look, we had to win our first baseball team. We're going to probably break some eggs in the omelet. That's okay, because unless you take some risks and do the first time, you're never going to know. It wasn't something we were doing for the 7 millionth time. This was the first one. So you encourage your people to believe, you support them, you take some risks. And I was talking to my old boss, Marty Thal. I don't know if you guys remember him.
Well, too. You knew Marty? Oh,
Marty.
Absolutely.
Marty is a legend and one of my favorites. And I reminded him of a line. I talked to him today, not because of this, but I just happened to talk to him about something because he sent me something profane over text, and I was laughing and I called him. And I said, Marty, remember you once told me you never know where the line is until you cross it. Now, that's not something you should do with regard to HR or compliance or anything like that. But sometimes when you're negotiating a big deal, you may not know where the line is. You got to probe, you got to test. And, sometimes you can pull back. And it's a context, it's a feel thing, but that's what you're doing. And I think with your team, getting the confidence that we could deliver a big project, which we did, the customer was very happy. Of course, there's always hiccups, anything technology, but they're very happy. And it was a great thing. I just wish the Mets had won the World Series when it was in 2022 because they lost to the Padres, because I probably could have gone a few games, but maybe they'll
Oh
get
yeah,
it.
that would have been all right. Yeah, that would have been
Well,
nice.
okay, as somebody who watches every home game, and actually my wife was away this weekend with her friends and they were on DVR, so I was not allowed to tell her the scores. So suffice
Wow.
it to say, I have seen your work and it is spectacular. So congratulations to your
Thank you.
former team on making that happen, because it is an absolutely amazing stadium, and the screens and just the whole immersion in the tech is just phenomenal. So well done. So,
Thank
hey,
you.
I want to take you back, okay?
Okay.
Because we were talking about our friends from in Redmond.
Yeah.
Um, I'm kind of interested in maybe a leadership moment in your early career, okay? Getting your Wayback Machine that kind of shaped how you lead today. It was like one of those, I will never forget this lessons, either imparted to you by your former leaders or something you recognized when you were at Microsoft. So, I mean, anything like that, like kind of like I'll never forget this, and you use it today.
I'll give you a couple.
Okay.
And, I'll start with one of my worst days at Microsoft. And it's not because of anything that happened to me, like a lost deal, though I had those. It's something I did. I think it might have been sometime in the earlier mid 90s. And maybe it was around the Asian flu time when the numbers were poor or whatever. But we had some sort of pre-meeting at MGX or something in Orlando. I'm pretty sure it was Orlando. And I got my leaders together. And I was feeling the heat from my superiors because we weren't delivering. And I sort of went Glengarry, Glen Ross. And I'd been a manager about 7 or 10 years. And I just thought that I needed to give them a butt kicking. And I did. And I was just so disappointed in myself because, of course, it didn't achieve the purpose that I wanted. And you were sort of beating people that they can't change the macroeconomic circumstances. There was more emotion than any kind of business thought or thinking. And so I've sort of learned from that. I think there's a time and a place for emotion. It's not every day,
Mhm.
but emotion without a plan and a butt kicking without a purpose is just a bad moment. So I've learned from that. I will say I still have tough conversations with people, but I think the forum and manner I did that as a relatively newer second line manager,
Mhm.
this was a big mistake. So that's a kind of negative one, I guess, but a positive that I've sort of learned. I'd say another one is around 2000, if you remember at Microsoft, we went to more of a vertical structure. So up until then, primarily the Microsoft field teams were organized geographically, with the exception of the federal business, which is so unique and germane. Um, and as we're going into this sort of reorg to focus on, in my case, the telco, the communications providers, um, we had a lot of folks who were still kind of license jockeys because that's how they grew up. Nothing wrong with that. They sold office licenses to IT directors. And now we're talking to telco executives with mission critical OSS, BSS systems, blah, blah, blah. And we sort of couldn't really talk the talk and we really couldn't walk the walk product wise and compete wise. So, in one sense, we had a really good year in 2000, FY 2001 when under Marty's leadership, I was one of his right hand guys. We were industry of the year. We got the award and everything else. And then the dot-com fallout thing happened. And so the next year was a barren desert with this customer segment. And so, the old legacy AT&T imploded.
Mhm.
Lucent was challenged. I remember a buddy of mine was working for Lucent in Boston. He's like, they were unscrewing light bulbs in parts of the building to save money. I mean, so it was tough times in the telco sector. And what we did was we learned how to sort of recalibrate and transform the organization. Okay, We're not going to make our number this year. Business is tough all over. We're missing our goals. What do we need to do to retool, reset, and set this business up for multi-year success? So in some cases, we rated Sun, who had their own challenges, and we brought in people who knew, like Phyllis Harris and Bob DeHaven, who knew how to talk to telcos and have that credibility. We brought in consultants to help coach up our team. Here's what the Telecom Act of 96 means. Here's what this means. Here's what operational support systems and billing support systems are. Here's the white space where we could apply SQL Server or whatever. So we used that year in FY02, I guess, to transform the business. And that became a great leadership lesson I've taken with me just about every company. I really do believe, even if things are well, you don't change for change's sake, but there's opportunity to transform your business if we're doing any kind of enterprise work. And so that was a very formative leadership lesson. And of course, Ron and Sam, there's great leaders at Microsoft and many other places that have impacted me and coached me. And I feel I'm a sapling of their tree, people like Bob Malone and Bob Jones and Marty Thal. And hopefully in some cases, I've been a bit of a coaching tree and help develop my people. It's one of the sense of pride I get when I see people like you, though I never managed you, Ron, you doing well at Amazon, or Tom Epps had a great career at Salesforce, or other people, went to Google. Like, I take a lot of pride that I developed leaders. It wasn't all me. I maybe gave them a sprinkle of this and a pinch of that. But, I take pride that people I know have just done so well, and in many cases surpassed what I've been able to do.
Yeah, and that's exciting. I mean, to be able to see the results in that. And there are some people who see that as a personal affront. Like, how dare someone do better than I did?
That's enough.
It's crazy, but it's unfortunate. I've always considered that to be a wildly immature person, leader, manager, if you will, who took that approach. I think you and I both have had folks who've worked for us that, ultimately, I ended up having a gentleman who I hired in as a consultant, and 7 years later, I was working for him. So,
Right.
it's pretty cool the way that some of that works out. All right, so I want to flip this one for you. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, something a little lighter. So
Okay.
I'm kind of interested in, a leadership failure or a misstep that taught you something, but when you think back on it, it still kind of makes you laugh. Because the last couple of things are a little serious. So let's, what do you got now kind of makes you chuckle when you think back and like, what the heck was I doing? You got to have at least a couple of stories.
No, I have a couple. I'm trying to think of which ones. So, there was a period in the early 2000s where I mentioned SQL Server, which is Microsoft's database. Oracle is and was still a behemoth, but there wasn't a lot of SQL Server in the telecommunications industry. And we were able to get a beachhead at Verizon and essentially win 3 bigger deals, tens of millions of dollars over a 4-year period. However, in one of those years, if you remember, Microsoft's fiscal year was June 30th.
Right.
We were working on a big deal. We had
all the deals come in the 29th.
Exactly.
Biggest
We
deals
had their
closed on the 29th.
procurement lined up. But, they had this great guy, George. He was a great guy, but George, I won't mention his last name, ran their procurement. And this guy was like, a pro's pro. I mean, you're walking off the car lot, you're done. No, you're coming back. Maybe we can revive it. And I was a sales manager then. I wasn't, or sales director. I wasn't the main salesperson. So we're working another deal. We're trying to get this done. Everyone's lined up. We did 2 deals each of the past 2 years. This is a bigger one, tens of millions. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal for my sales team. It's a big deal for me. It's a big deal for our sort of vertical. And we worked on it, whatever. We're negotiating like, no, we can't. We don't do it. We don't know, whatever. And then it's like, probably like you said, June 28th or June 29th. I remember I just landed at JFK. It's like 10 o'clock. And, you have those sneaky hot days in June on the East Coast. Like typically you get those June days that are kind of like 80, warm, but not hot. But this was one of those like late June days where it was like the dog days of August, but in June. You're getting off the airplane. You're in Seattle. It was nice and cool, 60 degrees. It's fucking, excuse me if I can say that on the show.
No, it's okay.
88
I
degrees,
think you're okay.
steering at like 10:30 at night after I got the afternoon flight from Seattle. And I'm checking my voicemail, remember voicemail? And basically, they didn't do the deal. It's like the old Lucy holding the football, Charlie Brown running.
Oh.
And then, you're standing there, you're exhausted from your travel, you're processing that. And again, this is material, not just to my team, not just to me, the industry, but for sort of the US business. And then, you're at the MGX or the sales meeting or whatever, and you're kind of a leper. Even though you had two big deals last time, whatever, hey, we were counting this and you were confident. And it's kind of like, people are kind of like, they don't want the stink to rub off on you. And you can be a hero. You're a goat, against Sopranos. What does Sildante sell, Paulie? You're only as good as your last envelope. You know that. Not entirely true in that context, but you whiffed. And as much as I sort of double confirmed, positioned accordingly, managed the risk, whatever, didn't get it done. And so you got to own that. You can't say, well, they screwed us, they this, they suck, whatever. You got to own it. I didn't get it done. My team didn't get it done. And you sort of learn that accountability, which is actually, looking back now, quite liberating. Because
Right.
you can say, I don't do that. And I think you're a crappy leader if you can never say, I made a mistake. I could have done this better. I didn't do that. I've worked for some incredible leaders who are self-aware, and I've worked for some awful leaders who just, it was never their problem. They never did anything wrong. It's always somebody else's fault. I learned in that leadership lesson around, you got to take accountability. Yeah, maybe things could have gone better. Maybe you could have done something different. Maybe the customer wasn't reasonable, but I still own the miss. I
Right.
think that's one. The other sort of one I'd say, if it's leadership lessons, and this is controversial, maybe it's not. But I remember towards the end of my time at Microsoft, I had to do one of those like mentoring conferences, and I just spoke to it. They happened to be in New York, and they asked me, it wasn't just for my group. And I said something along the lines of like, I've never regretted firing somebody too early, but I have regretted firing someone too late. And again, you want to give people chance, you want to coach, you want to help, you want to support, but sometimes you just know they're not performing, and we're all intelligent people. You can basically sell yourself anything. No, Joe needs more time, or it's going to be better. After you see enough evidence and mistakes, sometimes you just really know it's not going to be better. And so I think that's one of my leadership lessons is, particularly when it comes to talent, one bad cog in the machine, because it's not just the person and him or herself, what they're doing or not doing, it's the drag on everybody else. And you've got to see that as a leader, not necessarily what you want to believe, even if you also made a bad hire.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Appreciate that honesty too. And I do remember the leper thing. It's like, yeah, we don't want to get any of that. The guy who can't close. You don't get the steak knives, and you don't get the Cadillac. You get
Yeah.
Well, I didn't get prize 3, thankfully.
Hey, thank goodness for that.
I had a little support.
Hey, you'd mentioned when we were chatting a few minutes ago, you'd mentioned AI.
Okay.
And we had Sam and I've had some conversations with folks around AI. AI is like a hot button these days, all over LinkedIn. We won't rehash this week's lunacy
No.
around AI, but I know based on the bio that you were kind enough to send over, you're in the MIT AI strategy program.
Yes.
How do you see like AI changing? Dare I say, what great leadership looks like 5 years from now? I mean, what if you had a crystal ball? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a funny question. I'll give you some thoughts. I certainly don't
Sure.
have the crystal ball, and I don't know. Um, Before I took the class, I still spin the dial sometimes. Not everything I watch is streamed or planned. And The Terminator was on, the original one from 1984.
Skynet.
And if you think
Gotta love
about it,
Skynet.
Skynet. There's AI in it, right? You've got the Terminator who was impersonating whatever Linda Hamilton, I forget her character's name's voice. And she gets the call from her mom, but it's really the Terminator. I mean, there's AI spoofing now that you know. So there's a fair amount of that. Another one on my list to rewatch is a movie called Demolition Man with
Yep.
Steve Stallone and Sandra Bullock. I think Wesley Snipes is in it.
Yes.
Yes, he is.
There's a
love that
bunch of
movie.
AI stuff in there. It's from '93, so I want to kind of see
Love that movie.
their view of that. I just remember Be Well. But
Yes, and you get fined 25 credits for a violation of the verbal morality statute.
That's right. And using the three
some
shells in the bathroom.
societies globally have a social credit score, as you know. But what's interesting is, right, so we all kind of know the first level of what AI is, it can do. And, I have played with ChatGPT, but I say, I've got to learn more about this. So I decided to take this MIT AI strategy program. It's targeted for C-level executives. There's a cost to it. I'm in module 2 of 7 modules, so I'm learning a little bit more than I probably would on my own. It's good. When you have a class of folks sort of all over the world, and you have different cohorts. For example, one of my colleagues in my section, if you will, is working at Google in Brazil. So I did a one-on-one call with him just to kind of chat. And he was telling me, for example, around Google Notebook.ml. And, this like blew my mind. Again, I played with ChatGPT a little bit, but each module you have videos and you have a bunch of PDFs that are the notes. And I'm watching the videos, maybe taking a note here or there. I put this all into Google Notebook.ml like this week. I found out about it. I didn't know what it was. And it has all this like super summary, like in seconds. And I'm like, just think of all the analysts on Wall Street who have been making PowerPoint decks at 2 in the morning. Think about the strategy people at big tech companies, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. Like, this is going to change our world. And again, I'm just scratching the surface. So for me, and again, you have to also separate the hype. Like, there's tons of companies that have named themselves .ai. It's like a couple of years ago, I went to CES, the tech show in January in Vegas, and everything was smart home, smart this, smart that. Then I went this year, and it was like a copy and replace. Get rid of smart, put AI on it. That doesn't necessarily mean they're doing anything, but that means, everything's about AI. And so you have to kind of figure out what's real. But clearly, machine to machine agents, there is incredible opportunity. Do I think? I mean, you get sometimes on Zoom calls or meetings and someone brings their AI agent to take notes. Do I think you're going to see a human working for an AI machine? Not really. But I do think it's going to become more of a foundational technology for humans to use. And I sort of just look through every time technology. So one question is, are they going to eliminate jobs? I think it's going to make certain tasks and certain roles redundant, but it's going to create more jobs. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but it's going to be technology, everything everybody uses, just like everybody uses the internet or computer, or everyone used phones when they came out. There were times businesses didn't have phones, but time they became cheap after World War II, most businesses had phones. Then people had the internet and so on with AI. I do think, though, to answer your question fully, Ron, it will help get better data analysis, but the humanities, the way you interact with people, the way you speak and work, those things that were considered soft skills, maybe in our generation, are going to become even more important skills, not the opposite. It's not going to be our discussion transaction is going to be my AI agent talking to you. If anything, the ability to think, feel, perceive, motivate, those human skills are going to become even more important and more pronounced because a lot of the technical and mundane analytical work that sometimes took a long time will be cared for you. That's my view today on whatever today is. I could be wrong, but I think that's kind of the way I feel, at least as of today.
I think every day we start to see a little bit more advancements, and we can see a little bit more of what this is going to look like materialize. I love what you said about Notebook LM. Ron knows I'm a huge fan. I started using it, and I think just as an example for my job, and to your point, I saved hours because they have we're at my current role they're very big on recording every call, and instead of having to sit in front of every single call, I can either take the audio recording and or the transcript and load them into the AI, and I could say, okay, here are the last 10 phone calls that we've done with this customer. Why don't you give me a summary of, you know, what the pain points are, who the players and stakeholders are. So and I can review that with the account executive because I haven't been on those calls, and come back and say, does this jive with what you're thinking? And I can tell you that almost every single time the answer has been yes, and they've been just like, did you listen to all this? No, I didn't. I'm gonna tell you that I didn't do that, but what I did do is this is the point. I don't need to that. What I love about it in particular is that it's targeted.
Yeah.
It doesn't go out to the internet to fetch anything. What it does is the analysis of what you've given it, and it'll go ahead and do whatever analysis you ask based on what you've put in. So what I've explained to some of my coworkers who ask, how do you do this, is the more you put in, the better your results are going to be. But it's important because, like anything else, if you put crap data in, you're going to get crap data out. So
It's a great point. I mean, one way to think about intelligence, not necessarily artificial intelligence, is you've got a CPU, how much can you process, and you've got a database. I think like what we were just talking about is the AI helps your CPU process a lot faster because you have more information than you can consume. It also makes your database bigger, which you can index and get the salient information. So I think that is going to make us smarter. But I think if everybody puts their marketing copy into ChatGPT or tool and it looks like everybody else, it's going to be the same shit as everybody else. So you still need to write and speak and think, but you're using tools to manage the information. I would hate my daughters to just, and I know they're not, use ChatGPT or something to write every email because you'll just sound like everybody else.
That's
You need to do the fundamentals it yourself.
Mhm.
With that said, the processing power, the database power of this, it's scary, but it's exciting about what it can do.
that's
Yeah,
right.
and it's interesting you mentioned that, Harry, because again, another LinkedIn lunacy this week. People were talking about just folks just taking resumes, pump them into Chat GPT against a job description, and then just blindly taking the output and applying to jobs. And Chat GPT was like, "Oh, you need to have like a PhD in microbiology," and magically that shows up on the CV. It's like, wait a second, I don't have a PhD in microbiology, but it's like, okay, it says I got
got a
one.
PhD from ChatGPT University.
That's right, exactly. It's crazy, yes. But I think you're right. The human factor is
It's
super
yeah.
important. And I've told Sam and others, I write a lot of articles for LinkedIn, and I write them all by hand.
Wonderful.
Then what I'll usually do is I'll run them through ChatGPT to make it so I don't look like a dunce. And then I'll rewrite them again based on that output with my own flair and my own feelings and turn it back into being human.
Like a
But
triple baked potato. I had twice baked
exactly.
potato tonight, so you're already
I'm feeling that tonight.
iteration beyond me. I had two twice baked potatoes, so that's four, I guess. I don't know.
That's right. It's it's like 9 o'clock at night. It's almost time for a triple baked potato. Sorry, Sam. For those of you on the improper coast, it's a little earlier than 9 p.m. So, Sam, I've really, taken up a lot of Harry's time. I mean, did you have anything that you wanted to delve into? I mean, I want to be sensitive because it is like almost 9 o'clock, and
I know it is
Harry's,
almost 9 o'clock, and
it's
I can
almost
keep
bedtime.
going, so I'm doing whatever you guys want to do.
Are the
So
Mets playing tonight? I think they are.
they're in Arizona at 9:40, so we got time.
There you go.
oh,
You do
there you
have
go.
time.
They're out here on the West Coast, so there you go. No, I mean, as Harry has talked about all of these things, I've actually started thinking back to, I think about it when I hear these things. It causes me to reflect on, my own career going all the way back to, you know, the day that you and I met in a bar in Jacksonville, Ron, when we started way back when. And, from there, how, I wound up coming up and working out in New Jersey to when I finally got a chance to meet Harry and G as I was being taken into Lyndhurst to meet with our friends over there, and, you know, trying to convince them that, buying me for full time was a good idea, but we're gonna have to give it away a little bit before they figure that out. And what that turned into. And so I mean, I think about it, it makes me smile because those were some pretty remarkable days. And so um, but more importantly, the lessons that he's talking about are things that I'm taking the time to reflect on myself from when I was leading my team. And even now that I'm an IC, there are leadership principles that you don't put away just because you're an IC, right? I mean, that the fact is you don't have to have a manager in your title
Yep,
to be a leader. So
completely agree. And those were good times. And they're formative times, right? All of our careers when, looking back now, I just realized how blessed I was to work for such a great company, but also work with such great people. Many, like you two, who are friends. I don't speak to the two of you as often as I should, but others that, Microsoft people. Like I talked to Tony Prince last night. I talked to Marty today. I had lunch with Tom Epps last month. I'm very blessed for the relationships I get out of that endure well beyond us working together. It's a
Oh,
pretty incredible thing.
it really is. And when you take the minute to reflect on that, it is actually pretty tremendous. I when I get asked by folks, even a friend of mine who sat in as a co-host for one of our early episodes on this podcast, he's like, so how did you get to work with Ron, who couldn't be here today? I'm like, oh man, I'm like, at this point, Ron is, Ron's one of my oldest friends. He's my best. He's my best friend for. I mean, we haven't, at the time, we hadn't necessarily seen each other in a long time, but like, I mean, at this point, it's coming in on 30 years now. So,
Wow.
You'd never know that based on based on the fact that little gray in the beard and
yeah, I know,
whatnot.
right? Even I
Sure.
got it, right? I was just when we met, I was barely 25 years old at that point. So,
Cavaliere was the smart kid. I had all the business savvy because I was like 5 years older than him. And they're like, when they hired me at Microsoft, I'll never forget the day I walked in. They're like, wow, you're really old. We don't hire people as old as you. I was like, dude, I'm 30. It's like, what the hell?
I
To
wasn't even.
scare you, when I started at Microsoft, I was 22, just out of college. The average age in the New York office was under 30,
Yeah.
like
Okay.
29. And I felt like such a kid. Imagine if I went to work for, like, I don't know, some industrial products manufacturer or something. It would be different. And it was a different time and a place. But, you know, obviously you see the benefits of people of all ages and what they can contribute in the workplace.
Yeah, I wasn't even 25 yet. So when we started working, I was 24 years old. So yeah, it was, and I remember being at an offsite and we had to talk about what we had done before we came to Microsoft. And I had a part-time job in addition to my full-time job because I didn't have anything better to
Oh,
do. I
here
was
it
living in
comes.
Baltimore.
Here
I
it
was a
comes.
I was a mechanic in a bowling alley.
Yep. He's a Brunswick boy.
And so we're at the meeting doing this. We're doing this session
While you
with
were hugging a tree, probably.
yeah, and we were talking. Yep, and we're talking about the 7 habits of highly effective people, and you're supposed to talk about it. And I'm like, hi, I've been here for 3 months. And what'd you do before you came here? I'm like, oh, I was a mechanic in a bowling alley. And they looked over at me and they're like, what? And Ron's like, tell them the rest. And I'm like, oh yeah. And I worked over here for the railroad. I worked on their deployments beforehand. And I'm in, they're like, what do you do here now? I'm like, oh, I'm a consultant.
Yeah. We were so desperate for
I don't know
consulting.
why. It just brought back memories, Ron. I don't know if you were with us yet in the New Jersey district, but we had this offsite in the Poconos.
Oh my goodness, yes, we went to the Poconos.
Well, yeah, there
And
were
then
a couple
we just
times we went.
decided, not me, it was decided, I should say, that everyone was going to be thrown in the pool, whether they
Yes,
wanted to or not.
Yes.
And then,
yes.
Yeah.
maybe there was 200 people there. Probably 50 jumped in, then maybe the next 50 kind of jumped in late. Then there were like maybe 10 or 20 holdouts, and they were hunted down. You want to talk about like HR stuff? Literally, like
Yeah.
people were getting thrown in against their will. It's crazy.
Yeah, that doesn't fly today. But I mean,
No, it was like
No.
30 years ago. It was probably shouldn't have flown then either.
it's when we think about the things that we've been through. I mean, you talk about your daughters. I mean, I've got two kids who are about to turn 21 tomorrow, and I think about what we've done and the experiences that we had, good, bad, and indifferent, and know that they will never have that opportunity like
No.
we had.
I also think too, and it's something I think about. Maybe it's a leadership thing, maybe not. My father worked for Otis Elevator for 28 years.
Mhm.
He had a pension, different time and a place, that lasted 33 years. So his pension actually lasted long than his tenure. I worked at Microsoft for 20. I can't imagine my daughters are going to work for any company for 20 years. I just don't think it's going to happen. The
Right.
world has changed. Maybe I'm wrong, but just think about that. Like there was a time and a place where, people worked at some companies 30, 40 years, got the gold watch, retired. It's just a very different world. And there's a lot of good in that, but there's some difference in it too.
Yeah, it's not for everybody.
No,
I mean,
Yeah.
that's the challenge. I mean, if you remember the old Planet Fitness commercials, the guy, I pick things up and put things down. He's the big muscle bound dude, and they escort him off, and he goes to the back door and he doesn't realize he's locked out of the Planet Fitness. But there are some people who that's what they do. They're at Microsoft, we used to call them pro in place,
yeah,
and you just did the same thing day in and day out, and you were thrilled with it. And then there were people like us, where we wanted to do different things. We wanted to stretch. We wanted to go learn. We wanted to go grow. And you need both.
you do.
But I would argue today, with the generation we have today, and Sam and I've talked about it in other podcasts, they can't storytell. They barely communicate because everything is in short little bursts and tweets and texts. That they have, they're not great pick things up and put things down people,
Yeah.
because they want to constantly be moving and chasing and doing different things. And it's interesting because the world still needs those types of people, right? To pick things up and put things down. But a lot of the generation we have now is, wildly mobile. They want to just constantly consume and learn and go and try different things and experiences. So it's really going to be interesting. You mentioned AI as an example. I mean, maybe AI takes on some of those more wildly mundane tasks, right? My
Yeah.
wife spent years in accounting where, she was matching invoices to shipping things, right? And it was like a very manual process. And, as an example, that could be easily automated today. So you don't need those types of skills anymore, right? But, it's just an interesting world that we're in and where we're going. And like you said, that, I used to cover Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceuticals. They're a fantastic company. Love those guys in Raritan, New Jersey. And down the hallway, they had signs on the wall, people's names and the years they were there. There were people there 35 years, 30 years, 25 years. And it was a rite of passage for them to, move their name from, to the next 5 years. And,
Yeah.
people just really loved what they did, and they never aspired to do anything outside of that because they were just a pro in place.
And
And
to me, there's nothing wrong with that,
Right.
as long as the employee is bringing it every day versus sort of coasting. Because, I think I remember at another company once we had to unfortunately do a reduction in force. And, we had our list. You guys have been through this process, both
Yep.
maybe we've on one end or the other. And, we had a list of what I'm making this up, 15 people. And someone asked me, what about, James? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's on the list. And it's like James has been doing the same thing for 20 years. And we ended up taking somebody else off the list and put James on it. And I think both we as an organization failed James because we didn't develop, and he may have been able to do something else. He just did the same task until it was no longer needed. But James also failed himself because you've got to continue to learn and make yourself more marketable. And there's nothing wrong with being a pro in place, but the pro in place still has to learn and bring value versus coasting. The way things change so fast in the world now, you have to constantly continue to just add value.
yes.
And both the company and the employee each do a disservice if you're not learning and giving people the opportunity to learn.
No, absolutely. And I think I published an article 2 weeks ago about should I stay or should I go? Big
Clash.
reference to the Clash right
Na,
there,
na,
right?
na, 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 na.
Exactly. And it was the same thing. Are you learning? Are you growing? Are you developing? Are you
It was a
given
great
those
article.
opportunities? Because if you don't, it's like, it becomes like an appendix. It's just an atrophy. It just, you don't use it, you lose it. And next thing you know, you're way, way, way behind your peer group.
It is. And I think that's true. I'm seeing a little bit with AI. And you guys work for tech leaders. Some people are working for companies where they're not using AI at all. Like the company might have AI in their product, but they might not allow the people use it because Copilot's too expensive or whatever it is. And so what I would say to those employees, you've got to learn this on your own. You don't have to take the MIT class that I'm taking,
Mhm.
but there's tons of free stuff from Google and many others that you can learn about it, because you've got to stay relevant and current, because these are skills. Just like, everyone kind of knows how to use the internet. Imagine if you weren't computer literate. There are probably some people in lesser socioeconomic circumstances, sadly, that don't have access. And that puts them behind, digital divide or whatever you want to call it. But I think getting AI skills, and I know that a bunch of CEOs published a letter, I think a couple of days ago, that was in, I don't know, the Wall Street Journal, one of those papers about trying to, begin to have AI curriculum in schools, which I think is good. But it is also just important to invest in yourself. The three of us kind of grew up in a place where the
Right.
company did training. And I even think the generation before this, people got more training. My brother-in-law, um, he started as a sales rep. This is either late 70s or early 80s, selling paper. The company put him through a 1 year training program on salary, even though they were all commissioned to train them. Can you imagine starting in a professional job where you're basically getting 1 year of training? I'm sure there are certain disciplines that have it. That's not the main thing in corporate America right now. And for
Yeah.
good reason, maybe. But at the end of the day, the message I think for all of us as leaders, performers, whatever, you got to learn on your own. You're not going to get enough from the company. You got to learn on your own.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a great takeaway.
That
So
is a
hey
great
man,
takeaway.
it's like 9 o'clock East Coast time, and I know you got to go get ready for your Metsies. So hey man, I really want to thank you for taking the time to be here and for bringing not just your expertise, but your honesty, your perspective, and being so generous with your time.
Yeah,
You know,
really.
conversations like this are just a reminder of why leadership matters and why it's better when it's shared with people. And I really, really appreciate you. I really appreciate our reconnection. And I really appreciate us continuing to be partners in helping spread the word and helping people, educate themselves and understand a lot of the things we discussed tonight, everything from AI and leadership and empathy and, and taking care of others and helping people develop is so, so, so important. And I want to thank you for all you've ever done in order to make that happen.
I would even take it a step further and just say, even if all of that aside, having the opportunity to have a bunch of old friends and colleagues be able to reconnect after so long is really, really great. I was so glad to hear that Ron said that you were interested in coming on with us, because that's really terrific, Harry. I really do appreciate all the support you've given.
I can't thank you both enough. I mean, Ron, your words, I don't live up to them, but it is absolutely great to be here. And Sam, I absolutely agree, just reconnecting. I mean, it's very natural. I'm not giving talking points. This is just something that I enjoy chatting from the wonderful shared experiences that we sort of had. But I also want to give you guys a special credit, and though I'm not your sort of target demographic when I read these, seeing the articles you both generate, and Ron, you're like a machine on
Yeah, he
all
really
about
is.
entry level and career challenges. I mean, you did a couple of advice to recent college grads. My niece, who's my goddaughter, Ava, hopefully she listens to it, is graduating from Providence College in 2 weeks. I sent her both the one you did like 2 to 3 days ago and the one from, I think it was Kirsten Fife that you sent today.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's incredibly profound. But the empathy both of you have, and again, I'm on LinkedIn a lot, even I'm on it a lot. And the comments that you are willing to help job seekers. And we all see these posts on LinkedIn like, I've applied to 7,000 jobs, I'm living out of my car, or whatever. And maybe some of them are real, maybe they're not. But the genuineness and empathy from both of you about just trying to help people where you have no reason to help them, you're not going to get anything from it other than whether you're religious or not, I am, whether you call it karma, by helping other people you do help yourself and you get value out of it, even if it's not monetary value. So, with all the scam artists and everything on LinkedIn, the two of you have great experience. Let's face it, there's a lot of people struggling in this job market. I know tons of people at every level, from C level to individual contributor. A former employee of mine worked for like a smaller tech company. You wouldn't have heard of it. He called me last week. He's like, hey, can you catch up today? I knew exactly what it meant. It's one of two things. He either got a new job or he's going to need to look for another job. And it was number two. So there's a lot of people in this market and two genuine leaders, just good human beings, but strong professionals who are willing to share their time and not get anything out of it. It's God's work. Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you what we get out of it is we have the opportunity to interact with each other, and that, by the way, is everything. And I said it when I first started this out. When I actually found myself having to find a new job, Ron was there for me, and I needed it. And like I want to make sure that I'm offering something for everybody else, because when I needed it, he was there for me. So it's good.
Well, keep it up. People need your help. Let me know if I can help. Maybe I'll be invited back for a future podcast on
Would love
something
to.
Yep,
So
Love to
absolutely.
have you again. No, absolutely.
You just haven't been cursing enough as a New Yorker, so you have to dial it up
I'll,
for our
I'll have
next
a
time.
few. I'll turn on the Mets
There you
later.
go.
I actually tried to tone it down. I said I gotta be a little, more not profane today because
Well,
that's
hey, by the way, if you do send your niece a link to this podcast, Sam, that's one more listener. So we're going to
One
be at
more
like
listener.
12.
That's right.
well,
maybe
I don't know
13.
if this is a lot or a
Hundreds of
little.
listeners.
I looked the other day. I have 6,500 followers on LinkedIn. So when this is done,
6,400 of them are bots. Just saying.
exactly, probably, Um, by the way, I've got like yesterday, like 5 phishing attempts on my phone. I got anything from I left my bag in the office. Hi, how are you? So there's just all the bad stuff is out there. We just got to be on guard.
Oh, hey, man, thank you again. Greatly
Thank you.
appreciate it. Sam, I know you typically bring us home on the closing. Is there anything specific you want to?
This has been a really, really great session. There was so much to learn, and having the chance to reconnect with Harry is just tremendous. I thank everybody who took the time to listen for their time today. For Mr. Harry Patz, my co-host and good friend Ron Melanson, this is Sam. Take care of one another. It's the only way we get through the tough times. So be well and talk to you again soon.
Thank you for listening to the TechCurrents Podcast. The TechCurrents Podcast is hosted by Sam Cavaliere. All content and views expressed as part of the TechCurrents Podcast are solely those of the hosts and guests, and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the podcast platform, any employment organizations, or any affiliated entities. This podcast is informational purposes and should not be considered for professional, legal, or financial advice. Please consult with your qualified, licensed experts for your specific needs. This is Daniel Iverson. Thank you for listening.